bought a new bike at REI or Sports Basement or Performance or someplace like that, and you ask the sales clerk, what pressure how high a pressure should I pump up my tires? My advice on tire pressure is to pick a tire pressure that allows you to ride the most comfortably without risking a puncture. Now, to be able to give you an exact tire pressure number would be very difficult. It depends on the width of the tire and the weight of the bicycle, and your weight will greatly factor into what best tire pressure to use. So on this road bike here, I find that I can fit, the largest tire I can fit is a 28 millimeter tire, and the pressure that works the best for me, I weigh anywhere from 155 to 160, depending on how much riding I'm doing and how hydrated I am. If I'm riding a lot, I can drop down to 150. An extremely low end of my weight scale is 150. That's if I'm doing a lot of miles and I'm doing a lot of training. So I find with the 28 millimeter tire, I get kind of the best compromise between comfort and rolling resistance, somewhere around 80 psi on the back and 70 psi on the front. This bike weighs about 17 to 18 pounds, around 18 pounds. So if you use that math to come up with using 80 psi, you can kind of get an idea of how to scale that up or down depending on how much you weigh and how much your bike weighs. So that's at a 28 millimeter tire. If you're riding 25 millimeter tires or 23 millimeter tires, the smaller you go, the higher the pressure will need to be to prevent pinch flats when you run over something like a pothole or something like that on the road. Now the pressure variation is an extreme, dropping down. So let's say with a 23 millimeter tire, you're likely to be around 100 psi, 95 to 100 psi, and maybe on a 25 millimeter tire you would be around a 85 to 90 psi. You can experiment with that. I find different tire manufacturers, different tires and tire manufacturers, the pressure number needs to be adjusted depending on the stiffness of the tire itself, because that will change the way it rides and feels on the road. A stiffer tire will use less air pressure than a softer tire will. So you can adjust from there. On larger tires, when you get to 32 millimeters and up, I would start with a pressure around, I would go no higher than 70 psi, and I would start bringing the pressure down based on the size of the tire. So if you're at a 32 millimeter tires are probably good around 70 psi, and maybe 65 to 70 psi is that's somewhere in that range. And then if you get 35, 38 millimeter tires, you want to come down to 60 psi, and then when you get into the 40 millimeter and above, you're probably down in the 50 to 50 psi range. And again, those are just starting points. Everyone will experiment with different pressure. There is this perception that if you have higher tire pressure, if you pump it all the way up to the manufacturer's maximum, which I believe with these is 110, that you feel as though you're riding faster than you really are. And that's because of the sensation you're getting from the road. The higher the tire pressure is, the more road feel you will have. That vibration will transfer through the bike, through the tire, through the bike into you, and so you feel as though you're going faster than you really are. And that was something that was discussed in pretty good detail on the Compass. Jan Heine's bicycle blog talked a lot about that, and from my experience that seems to hold pretty true. I feel like if you were to measure your efforts more, if you use a power meter, or you have some kind of cycling computer and you have an ability to kind of track your averages over time, you will see that that's pretty much how it is. That's realistic. That you won't get in. You're not going to lose a lot any speed, any measurable speed by riding lower pressure. It's more of a perception thing. So anyway, that's my thought on that's what tire pressure I use. That's how I set my tire pressure. You can experiment with it. The nice thing about tire pressure is it doesn't cost anything to experiment with it. California dreaming.